Hello all. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you, as the case may be. This is Manav. I'm the co-founder here at BarRaiser, a leading AI-powered interview platform that helps companies make better hiring decisions faster. Not so recently, generative AI sort of took the world by storm, and most of us have either been using it, some of us claim to be experts in it, and I know a few people who are also calling it the doomsday that, hey, it's going to take our jobs and stuff. I think we all know better. And while the tech is new, I'm sure it's here to stay. And sooner or later, it's better that we embrace it. We do, however, need to understand the impacts, the pitfalls, regulations around it. And that's exactly why we came together today. And, I have this extremely experienced and relevant panel to guide you through it. Some logistics. During this conversation, I might float in a few polls in the background. I'm really looking at participation from all the people for getting us some insights that we would help and would be shared across as well later on. You have shared some question and answer questions, and if during the conversation you have more questions, just feel free to type it in the chat. We will have a Q&A session at the end where I'll try to address most of them. Coming to our panel, so I'm joined with David Navetta, who is the partner at Cooley LLP, a leading law firm. David has been practicing law in the areas of tech, data protection, and cybersecurity for over 2 decades, and is a thought leader in legal issues concerning AI, especially in the area of human resources. Welcome, David. I have Neetu Parab joining us from HubSpot. She is the Director of Global Tech Recruiting. In her career spanning of over 15 years, Neetu has successfully transitioned the standardized, or so-called the old school way of hiring, into a more data-driven decision-making process while improving candidate experience as well as hiring outcomes. And I'm joined with Ivan Lee. He heads the DEI initiatives at Elastic. Ivan, in his over 15 years of career leading different teams in the area of corporate social responsibility, environmental social governance, L&D, as well as DEI. And his work has uncovered crucial aspects for some of the leading Fortune 500 companies. Thank you all for joining. Without much ado, I'll just kick it off. And for the audience, we'll have a quick poll running in the background about where would they like to, see AI introduced in their hiring process. So this question is to all three of you. From your unique perspectives around the different functions that you oversee, where do you see the most significant shift that AI has introduced when it comes to, recruitment or talent acquisition in general? We can start by Neetu. You can start, please.
Sure thing. So data-driven decision and talent acquisition is not new, right? Like we have always had data as a primary focus in data analytics, whether it is like funnel reporting or whether it is interview capacity or different dimensions of talent acquisition, including even the candidate experience. That said, what AI really brings is even more emphasis on data-driven ability to even more like look at the predictive analytics, look at the historical data, and now go even beyond what in talent acquisition space we have been doing to really thinking about quality of hire, even from a different dimension, looking at candidate success rates, looking at retention rates, creating efficiency and higher productivity by optimizing some ongoing tasks, and to really bring that little more, not just data-driven decisions, but also the qualitative approach in how we address hiring in the industry. So that's just an overarching my viewpoint on it. That said, I truly don't believe it really replaces decision-making or human aspect to it, but there is a lot of power and a ton of goodness in it that it can bring to the talent acquisition.
Thank you. I'll turn to Ivan.
Yeah, I want to double click on what Neetu said, that AI and machine learning tools supplement the human decision-making process. It's not a replacement for it. And in order to best use these tools, the users, the recruiting team, the leaders, the hiring managers must understand how these tools are operating. So that's number one. My vantage point suggests that as the company side tools, the tools that the organizations are using, as they become more complex, so does the candidate side tools. So some examples of tools that candidates are using include like resume.ai or interview practice tools like Standout. I think that that's another important shift in this equation, because recruiters have to understand how candidates are using these tools. And from one perspective, these tools are democratizing access to organizations and top talent. So it's a double-edged sword. And then at the same time, it gives an edge to people who may not be qualified for the job, but they know how to play the game, right? So you have to be very careful as to how these tools are being used by candidates to give them maybe an unfair advantage, however you define that.
Very unique. Thank you. David?
I'll triple click on the fact that a lot of the analytics is not new, and artificial intelligence and machine learning has been employed for some time. I think from a legal perspective, what we're seeing is generative AI kind of waking legislators and regulators up a little bit. There may be a little bit of FUD, fear, uncertainty, what's the last one, and doubt about AI. And I think where it's focused is kind of counter to what Neetu and Ivan have said, the fear that the machine will make the decision without human intervention, that it will be set up in a way, in a black box capacity where people don't understand how the decisions are being made, which could result in bias, which potentially exposes privacy-related issues based on the data sets going into the machine learning. And legislators are starting to really get active in this space. We've got a couple laws that have been put into place already in a few jurisdictions, but almost at every level, state, federal, international, there are laws being considered around artificial intelligence and machine learning. Now, one thing to point out is that with laws like the Fair Credit Reporting Act, there have always been privacy-oriented laws around decisions like employment. And so that's also not new. I think that just the regulators and legislators view this as sort of a higher level of non-human interaction, which creates in their minds additional risks. I'm not sure that's the case necessarily, but I think regardless of whether that is the case, we're going to see a lot more regulation in this space, which will make it perhaps more difficult to use these tools without taking some additional compliance steps.
Awesome. I heard you said something about the fear, and I have a few questions about the fear as well further down the conversation based on what people have submitted. But I'll keep it parked just for now. But that's a very, very interesting thing that you mentioned there. So yeah, I'll further, try to dive deeper with maybe Neetu, in your experience, modern AI tools, which, not necessarily replace the human decision making, but just augment it. For BarRaiser, for example, how do they influence, or in your experience, or what you talk to your network, how do they influence the entire recruitment process?
You're on mute.
You're on mute, Neetu.
Sorry, I'm back.
No worries.
I was saying, if you look at the recruiting cycle, right, like right from sourcing aspect, and that starts with how candidates and companies are getting matched, I think it definitely impacts right from that level all the way to how we interview the candidate, how we make identify the right candidate for the job after the evaluation process. Like, now there are 2 or 3 different aspects that come in this whole play. One is the recruiting process, or the recruiting team augmenting AI tools augmentation within the recruiting process. Then it comes with the candidate side of things, like how are they, like what Evan was talking about, how are they interacting in that whole interview process? If you give them a take-home test now, they are probably running it on OpenAI, right? Like, so that might not anymore work as effectively as a filter as it used to work. But if you have right tools like BarRaiser or like, other tools in the market space that really identify candidates by right data, because ultimately the tool is only as effective as the data used for these models.
Exactly.
So as long as it is more customized and it is done in a right way, there have been experiments by even some of the large companies where they started the candidate matching process using an AI tool, and it went really, really wrong. It actually increased the bias in how the candidates were filtered. And the candidates learned to how to game the system. And also the recruiters were, the teams, the talent acquisition teams were anticipating that it'll filter out a lot of unwanted candidates, and actually that didn't happen. It did opposite of that, right? So it truly depends on what the data has been given for the data models, and how it's responding back. But right from that sourcing, candidate matching, all the way to how the interviewers are evaluating, how the interviewers are communicating to the candidates, how the candidate is communicating, the body language, the tone, like so much can be transcripts, interview feedbacks, the scorecard writing. Like there is just so many aspects, right from A to Z, that can be made more efficient and effective. Although it does, as I'll just keep emphasizing throughout an hour, that it does not take the human factor and the judgment call and the decision making that comes with the empathy and the connection that comes with the human aspect of it.
Absolutely. Thank you. And to follow up with that, especially from David, right? Are there any legal aspects that are tied to, using AI augmented or AI enhanced hiring process?
Yeah, in this context, there already are laws. I mean, one of the first ones was in New York City, which really was a law about bias and doing an audit around artificial intelligence that is used to make employment-related decisions for New York employees or applicants. So there again, the idea is understanding whether or not the data, as Neetu was saying, going into the model is producing results that skew one way or another that could affect a candidate's employment in a way that is discriminatory in fashion. So what you're going to have to do there for your tools is actually have perhaps a data scientist or others vet and test those tools to ensure that there isn't a bias, or at least take a reasonable attempt at doing that. I think this is where the technical side of things gets a little bit fuzzy for me. I worry that detecting bias may be very difficult ultimately, and I'm not sure how advanced the procedures are that we have right now for actually finding bias are. So that's going to be something that's going to develop over time. The EEOC has taken steps in enforcement activity around AI and machine learning against a company called iTrust that was just settled in September earlier this month for $365,000, alleging age discrimination. Now, again, I'm not sure that was AI machine learning. They just had a cutoff for people under 55 or years of age for their service. So that's a very low level type of artificial intelligence. And then there's been at least one class action lawsuit against a big company alleging that their algorithm for screening was racially biased. So the reality is legally it's already happening in terms of activity and risk that's existing. There's also some new laws coming on in the context of AI for video interviews. Illinois and Maryland have a law that requires consent and notification that a video AI is actually reading facial expressions and right. Taking measures of people's reactions to things as part of the screening and employment interviewing process. So that That's another area where we already see regulation. More generally speaking, automated decision-making is an area that's regulated by privacy laws as well. So California's Consumer Privacy Act, GDPR in Europe, there are data privacy impact assessments that need to go along with using automated decision-making in certain contexts. Opt-outs may be allowed in California for a person to opt out of automated decision-making processing. And then more tangentially, Fair Credit Reporting Act may start to come back into play if a company is third party is offering something that basically makes them into a credit reporting agency. There are laws that apply there where statutory damages exist in class action activities, very prominent already. So we see this legal terrain developing. Some of it's already here, and then then we have a bunch of legislation that is in the queue that could change the environment as well. So I think it'll be a very active area, maybe an overreaction in my opinion. Again, based on FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. But again, inevitable that we're going to have more regulation here and more hoops to jump through from an organization that wants to use this technology as well as vendors who are developing it.
Oh, thank you. And sorry, just a quick add on. Do you see most of these regulations sort of converge into one another, like, because there are so many coming out and so many people are, so many states are trying to do different things. It just becomes a sort of makes sense, either a federal law or maybe something that converges at the end of the day, like GDPR has become like a gold standard, something similar to coming out in this direction?
Well, we've been waiting for a federal privacy law for a very long time, and we don't have that. I doubt that we'll have a single law that preempts everything from the federal side. What your point about GDPR is well taken, though. I think there'll be certain approaches that will be reflected in these laws, whether they're at the state level, federal level, international, that will be similar. And so hopefully, in terms of building a compliance program, you'll be able to take those commonalities, match them up, and have some scaled ability to comply with these laws, hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. Thank you so much. Just for the audience, I'm going to float another poll on, trying to see where they would like to bring in AI in interviews for, in different options. Because now we are moving from what AI can do, moving to what AI can do, right? So the first part, I'll start with Ivan. And Ivan, please feel free to pitch in a little bit on the candidate side as well, which is a very unique perspective that you brought in. AI-assisted notes have sort of become a norm, right? Like if I talk about talent assessment, maybe AI-assisted interview notes could be one area. How do we ensure, or can we ensure, to mitigate risk, mitigate bias in such documentation?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the foundation that I want to set is that everyone is very excited about jumping in to the usage of these AI and machine learning tools. But before that, I want to set the foundation that, everyone should be using standardized processes on the company side, diverse interview panels, structured interview questions, interview scorecards. Regardless of your usage of such tools, you should have these as a foundation before dipping your toes into AI tools. I would say definitely check it out, but take it slow, because if you don't have the foundation of these bias mitigating processes as part of your recruiting process, if you introduce other tools, it's going to muddy the waters, and you won't be able to identify, as you're doing a kind of your back test, right, to measure effectiveness. You won't be easily able to identify where things are not going the way you want. So, one more thing to add to that standardized list is standardized technical skill assessments like Code Signal, and like Neetu mentioned, maybe have it timed, maybe have it live so they don't take it home and then use another tool to give you the answers. But I wanted to lay that as the foundation, because once you understand what you're looking for and how you've created a bias mitigation system, then you can overlay AI on top of that. So for example, with regards to interview transcripts, if the tool that you're using is just recording your conversation and then giving you a transcript of the conversation post interview, I think that's super helpful. That's a fantastic use of all the tools that are available. And then if you go one step deeper, then you can ask yourself, if the tool is parsing the conversation and the highlighting relevant terms, you have to understand, how is the tool defining relevant terms? Because you want to make sure that the tool is helping you mitigate your biases without introducing its own biases. Right. So that's why we said earlier, you have to understand, how's the tool parsing out, saying, I'm going to highlight this term for you, post-interview review. And another aspect to consider is something that is helpful, that I think is more on the front end during the interview process, is there are AI tools that are listening while you're interviewing and suggesting relevant questions, right? A little pop-up window says, hey, you're 15 minutes into your interview. Have you covered these questions? I think that is a helpful usage of AI nudging the interviewer to stick to the script, right? But that goes back to, you must have a standardized interview questions that helps to mitigate bias, and then the AI tool supplements that process.
Oh, very interesting. And I think what I also hear is, once an organization has these kind of foundation laid down, you do talk about that they are at a certain level of maturity, so to say, or have evolved into their hiring process in a way that they have these basic things set up. And now what they can use is something like a co-pilot for interviews, for example, that helps interviewers with these advanced features. I'll follow it up with Neetu.
I had one question on to Ivan, or not question, a comment. I think it should be clear that bias, the interests of the employer and the applicant are aligned, because if bias is applied, that means you could be missing good candidates based on criteria that are not relevant to the employment, right? And so when we think about bias, it seems like a one-way street, but really employers don't want bias in their algorithms for their own purposes, for their own advantage, and to be able to identify good candidates. So we shouldn't view it as adversarial. There's a common interest, I think, on the employee and the employer side to get it right.
Very good point. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with that. In fact, to just add on to that, I would say that AI can amplify the problems if the baseline is not covered well, right? And that's why having a matured data sets, as well as matured already process in place, at least the good structure and foundation in place, is super important before we start exploring the AI tools on top of it. Sorry, that was just a comment based on
No,
what
that's absolutely fine. I was just coming to you for your experiences with any of these automated note-taking tools that you'd probably like to share, if you have used any or heard of any. But
yeah, so I've been experimenting on my own a little bit with rev.com. There's also, I was just looking at Zoom AI Companion now that they just recently rolled out, which also has a transcript mode. I have been working with a couple other products that really focus on interviewer training. Like, I think BarRaiser also has that aspect in their product, where we can roll out interviewer trainings at a time, and then if there is no reinforcement and ongoing effort in that direction, going back to the foundation, have we done our foundational work to really mitigate bias, right? The answer to me would be a no if there is no reinforcement. So I've been just experimenting with some of those products out there, and obviously along with BarRaiser and some other like OpenAI or rev.com.
Cool. Thank you so much. Coming to decision making now. So we did speak about decision making, and David, with we won't want to be repetitive, but I just wanted to know that, like, as AI is growing, and we know that there are areas where AI is sort of making some decisions, right? Not necessarily in employment, but when we talk about specifically hiring, the legal challenges, and some of them you alluded to, but in case we talk about if a company wants to adopt something which makes AI decisions, or let's say even if it doesn't, but indirectly sort of leads to making an AI-based decision, what kind of legal framework one needs to be very, very aware of?
So I think Neetu and Ivan both sort of alluded to what I think I would call governance. So you have your own employment, process for hiring people, for screening applicants, for discharging people. That's your framework generally, right, as a good organization. If you bring an AI tool into that framework, how does that affect your compliance? How does that affect, if there's a bias tool, does it affect all the work you've done to address DEI issues, right, as a general matter as part of your employment program? So I think you have to be very careful now with HR departments, if you're on the employer side, who are just sort of going out and grabbing tools and not thinking about how they fit into the big picture, not only as the organization has set up their program, but from a legal perspective as well. So I think what I would recommend companies to do now is, first of all, start monitoring what's happening already. Monitor the laws that exist, how regulators are reacting to them, what plaintiffs are doing if there's lawsuits that are being filed, and what are legislators proposing in terms of these laws. You don't want to start a process or have a tool that you start using, and then suddenly, it's illegal, or you have to go and get consents or do a bunch of things that are onerous that may not be very helpful or efficient for the organization. So being very deliberate about that. The bias issue, as I mentioned before, there are already laws, and even if there isn't a specific law in place, you could be sued under Title VII type discrimination type activity in legislation. So making sure that there isn't bias is going to be important. So if it's a homegrown approach with AI and machine learning, you may need a data scientist to help you vet that. If it's a third party, I see that employers are going to be asking many more questions of those third parties, and probably wanting the third party itself to validate that it's done its homework around bias, so that it has the equivalent of a SOC 2 that's in the security context, SOC 2 type report saying, we've had someone look at this, there's no bias, and we can move forward with that tool. So I think that all comes back down to the governance aspect of things. So making sure that if people are actually going out and trying to either use these tools or build out these processes, that someone on the legal team or the privacy team is looking at this and making sure that all the dots are connected from a legal perspective. Now, again, I'm not sure if this is going to be a new type of process, a new challenge, because perhaps HR departments in the past haven't had to dive deep into the technology itself to be able to take certain steps and build out their programs. So, I suspect, though, that some of the analysis can't be done by a traditional HR department, and you're going to have more engineers, more data scientists who have to weigh in and help guide the process, as well as lawyers from the compliance point of view. So I see that as the future, which ironically undercuts some of the benefits of these tools, right? The efficiency, scalability. So there'll be a balancing act that has to occur to achieve the benefit of the tools while addressing compliance and not getting yourself in trouble in using these types of tools.
And just to be clear, you mentioned SOC 2, right, which is more about data protection. Is there some kind of a standard that is already governing AI, or it's yet to come out, like which companies can certify for and then say that, hey, we are compliant?
I think we need to have a data scientist on our next panel to tell us that.
Exactly.
It's still in development, I believe. And again, I'm not going to pretend I can do that analysis myself as a lawyer. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think standards will develop, I suspect, over time. There's a benefit to that. But I think we're early days when it comes to that.
And Neetu and Ivan, basically in your current organizations or your networks, do you see this governance or monitoring as something that companies have already started doing as they prep to bring in AI, not in different parts of the entire process?
Yeah, I can speak for just our product, right? Like HubSpot, there's obviously a huge component. Like Dharmesh is pretty active on LinkedIn, and the work that he's done around it has been fantastic. And I'm super proud of what HubSpot has produced there. Within my network outside of the company, there's many talent acquisition professionals who have really mixed feelings, to be honest. Some see that there is a huge benefit that can, whether it's efficiency or the objectivity that the tools can bring in. But then there are concerns around bias mitigation. That said, my probe to that is always, or my push to that is always like, is there no bias right now in interview process, right? Like, would actually AI help us to mitigate what humans are doing right now if done right and under right governance? I think yes, there is definitely a huge opportunity there, and it will evolve. It's in a transformation stage. It's just starting out. And I think it will continue to evolve. There will be some quirks that people will, companies will have to manage through, and then we'll get to a place where it is used much more effectively, like any other new stuff out there. The other piece that I think there has been ongoing conversations is around transparency concerns, right? Because when you think about the opacity of the certain AI algorithms, there's definitely some concerns and worry about the lack of transparency, if especially there are certain aspects of decisions that the tool is making. How much is available for the HR or the recruiting department, in what went into that decision, or what is available for the hiring managers and what went into that decision, as simple as why certain candidates were filtered in for an interview process, right? Like that's top of the funnel. So right from that stage all the way down. So there's definitely been some concerns around that. That said, people are definitely, like in my network, I see a lot of excitement around it. Everybody wants to jump on that wagon and really start experimenting and learn from it. Everybody wants to know more about it. And I think most talent acquisition professionals who are data-driven are just excited about how much more data people can have through our tools or the new AI tools. And I think that's huge, in my opinion, personally being super data-driven.
Thank you. Ivan, you have anything to add?
Ivan, I'll have a comment after
Please.
Ivan.
Oh, you got it. I totally agree with Neetu that there's opportunity that comes with an enhanced data set. So for example, with interview transcripts, you can go back and you're like, oh, wait, I missed that part of the conversation because I was too focused on this part of the conversation. So you're reviewing that information, you see it, and with regards to transparency, you're also able to share that information with other interview panelists and say, hey, this is what I interpreted from this, but you actually have the raw transcript. So you're looking at the data straight from the horse's mouth. So I think with that type of these type of tools, it's helping to provide the context for mitigating bias and also providing the data set to offer transparency when it's asked for. So I think that is something I wanted to add. And I think one more thing just to double click on that I think we've shared before is that I don't want to call this AI-driven decision-making. I want to call it what it is, which is data-informed decision-making, right? The humans are still making the choices. The tools itself, ideally, they do not have a direct role in decision-making process. Rather, they're augmenting human decisions. So words really matter. So I wanted to call that out.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I think
yes, please.
Where the devil's in the details, right? To what extent is there the human intervention, right? And to what extent isn't there? And this goes to the fear aspect of things. I think there's, in the privacy world, there's always this kind of creepiness factor that exists, right? If you go too far, things just don't feel comfortable. I'm talking about use of AI to read people's facial expressions or capture information about their voice that could tell them something about their health status. I'm aware of products and services that actually can do that now. When you start to go into that realm with AI, and kind of create a situation that where the computer is doing kind of more decision making than a human can do, in a sense, based on things that humans can't maybe understand or even perceive, you start to get to a place where I think people dislike what's happening, regulators get upset, and that creepy factor starts to weigh in and creates, in my opinion, sort of irrational fear sometimes, because a lot of the practices in AI and machine learning are completely, as Ivan said, data-driven, more objective probably than the actual human being, as Neetu was saying. But when you start pushing the envelope, it can ruin the entire kind of impression of the technology. And so you have to be very careful of that. Last thing on governance, we have in the privacy and security world, the concept of privacy by design, security by design. So I see all of this activity not only happening at the policy level and kind of the administrative governance level, but going back to the design of the software, the coding itself, the data sets, and how you're designing the data, how you're training the algorithm to create things that work and that don't get you in trouble later down the line. Third parties and companies developing their own processes and coding need to start thinking at the beginning of the process about these issues and not trying to fix it after the fact and retrograde it, which is much less efficient and can get you into a lot of trouble. So moving these considerations up to the design phase is going to be very important to have this industry flourish and also comply with the laws that are going to be coming out there. Manav, we can't hear you. You might be on mute.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yep, back here. So thank you so much for that last part, because I had a question specifically for this on what can companies or software developers do while building their products, but you answered it very well, right? So they add it in the design. But I'll skip some parts, just a quick one, David, as a follow-up. I have seen that there's a school of thought out there that says that AI, rather than adding bias, can help mitigate bias as well, right? And some people are very, very strong believers of the same. Do you see from a regulatory landscape or talking to maybe a few regulators out there that even that regulator body or the regulation themselves are a little unsure of this, or they are divided when it comes to this? How does this seem to be evolving, right? Is it like set in stone that AI is biased, or there are people who still believe that it can help in mitigating it? You're on mute, Dave.
It's the fear factor and the fear of bias, right? And Neetu addressed it earlier, the kind of the black box concept, not knowing what the algorithm is doing or how it's coming to its decisions. I think if I were going to, spin it, I would spin it the way that you just did, right? First spin is our interests are aligned. We don't want bias in our algorithm because that's going to hurt us. Second spin is we actually can root out human bias if we're doing this in the right way. And so therefore, there's a net positive from a DEI perspective potentially, and otherwise, if you do it correctly. So I think, if I were a PR firm, I would be trumpeting this much more, because I think that is the reality. I think we will get to a place where some of the human bias that every individual has can be taken out of the equation to a large degree.
Cool. Thank you so much. As we were talking about fear, I'm just going to roll out another poll for the audience on what are they worried about, especially when implementing AI in their hiring process. So while that runs in the background, I do want to cover a little bit about, the building DEI while using AI in hiring. So Ivan, I'll come quickly to you. If some organizations have created the baseline as you spoke about, or have that foundation that you spoke about, how does one use AI tools to build more objectivity in assessments, right? And as well as scoring? Are there some frameworks that you are using, or probably people are using out there, that can help people build on top of the foundation that they've already built, leveraging AI?
Well, first, I want to give a shout out to Julie McDowell, who is actually on this call. She leads talent acquisition at Elastic, the entire team, and she has worked very closely with my team to embed bias mitigation measures across the entire TA process. So definitely, chime in, Julie, if you're there. And I think it's my answer goes back to having the established systems and processes, right? Regardless of what tools you're using, organizations, the root of bias in organizations is systemic. It's baked into policies and programs. It's baked into, for example, recruiting guides, right? How does it operate? So if you can modify the policies first and foremost, and maybe use a tool, for example, like a Texio, to identify inclusive language in your job postings itself, then you have a much greater chance of using more advanced tools that then augment that process. So again, the tools should be designed to identify biases without introducing additional biases. And so that's one thing that I wanted to highlight as well, just as Dave mentioned earlier, right? You want to do some back testing. You want to identify if you're going to be using either a homegrown tool or purchasing a tool, that you have the data to show that it's actually having a net impact, rather than introducing the biases of, for example, the developers who programmed the tool. So that's another thing to watch out for. But overall, I totally agree with what they mentioned. They basically answered the question for me, which is that the opportunities, when we use the tools in the right way to augment bias mitigation systems and processes, it has a significant opportunity to create the outcomes, the more equitable outcomes that we want, both in the US as well as in the global context.
Cool. So just one last question before we jump into the Q&A. I see already.
Can I just chime in?
Yes, please.
I will just add one more point of view into that. Even and Dave really did a great job of addressing that question. I think one piece that I can add to that is a lot of companies talk about DNIB. They talk about certain even percentages that they want the company to be at, and I think the root cause when I've done the root cause analysis of why companies struggle, a lot of it also is the education that goes into with the interviewers, with the employees, that is missing, because they hear all this, they want to do it, they just don't know how, right? And there is a huge opportunity within the AI world where we could probably come up with certain aspects of that education and creating a little bit automation around the how, which could really up-level and elevate those organizations.
Got it. Thank you, Neetu. Sorry, so in the interest of time, I'm also going to take some thoughts from all the panelists on what do they see as the future landscape. How do they see AI generally transforming in the next 5 years, changes in the tech, changes in the company's recruitment process, and changing in the tools that are out there, because we have a few questions flowing in that I would definitely want to take as well. So I'm opening this last question to all three of you. Would love to get some closing remarks on what does the future hold.
I can go first. I would say augmentation and not replacement. I think that is something that I want to highlight, because there is a lot of fear around it, along with the biases and the laws that Dave has spoken about. Like in the talent acquisition industry, there is a huge fear of, will it take away my job, right? And I just want to highlight that it's just augmenting, it's not replacing. I truly believe that it'll bring a lot of goodness in terms of how the repetitive and mundane administrative, or like, the recruiter time, how they spend, can actually elevate even their skills that they are putting into practice, and how that connection with the candidate, they will have more time to do all of that. So I think AI can totally take on those tasks, so that the connection between the recruiter, the candidate experience elevation, all that can be done really well, ultimately for decision making to be done with a judgment call from humans.
Yep, valid. Ivan,
I'll
you have
double click on, yeah, thank you. I'll double click on Neetu, and I'll also add that I think a very exciting field for me is considering how AI is improving the human experience, especially the work experience. So indeed, in addition to taking care of some of the more mundane or repetitive tasks and offloading that from humans, there's also, I see opportunities where AI is teaching humans. So as I mentioned earlier, like the Texio tool and even Grammarly, tools like Grammarly, they're actually, when I use it, they actually teach me how to write better. So these are tools that are giving me suggestions like, okay, you can maybe change this phrasing to this, or move this sentence structure to the beginning. And it's very helpful for me, but not only personally, but also I'm thinking about the application on a company level, both for employees in general, and as well as for hiring managers and recruiting teams, to write with more inclusive language, and also to understand people who do not have English as a first language, right? English as a second language, especially at Elastic, we operate in more than 45 countries. And so we truly have a globally distributed workforce. Having that level of augmentation and teaching is very helpful. One more thing to add to that is something that I remember using about a year ago is productivity, AI productivity enhancements. So for example, I remember Microsoft Office actually looked at my schedule, right? And then suggested blocks, and you give it permission, right? And then it will automatically schedule deep work, right? The science shows that if you block time to not collaborate, right? There's over collaboration. You block time to just be by yourself for 45-minute chunks, followed by 5 to 10-minute breaks. You are much more productive. And these are things that, so far at least, only humans can do. So this AI scheduling tool is automatically blocking time on my calendar so that I can do better work. Why not? So that's another thing that I see as a future of AI augmenting human productivity.
Yeah.
Cool. Dave?
I've already previewed, I think there are going to be a lot more laws and more need to address those laws. What I'd like to see in the future, the premise of all this is, substantively, if this all works, companies will be able to hire better candidates who actually do better for the company, right? And so it would be excellent if we're going to close the loop and actually have some analytics to see how it compares to just a pure human kind of engagement process versus versus a fully automated process, which again, I think we probably will never have, hopefully. But at the end of the day, we have all these tools now, and they promise a lot of things. Now we have to actually get the data to measure whether the tools are performing. So I would love to see that happen over time, and I'm sure it will, and I'm sure it'll feed back right into the algorithm, and every company will get the perfect employee every single time. I'm sure that will happen soon.
Goes back to the quality of hires and closing the loop with impact. Dave, you're right on.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
I don't know if any of these tools are measuring that, because you have to collaborate with the actual user of the tool to figure out what the outcomes look like, right? I think that would be really interesting to see.
Yes, absolutely. That's being done right now. I can talk about BarRaiser for sure. It is happening as we speak. I have some questions coming in, so I'm just gonna lay them out. So this is a very interesting question, and maybe I can relate it to this a little bit. Can we use AI for things like CV sifting or resume shortlisting and still be able to mitigate bias? Because I guess most of these models would look at your past preferences to do the sifting right now. So and still be mitigating bias, again, coming to the fact that your past data was not biased. Any thoughts on this? I guess more relevant to Ivan and Neetu.
Yeah, I just started playing around with this and trying to understand more. I think the names, like if you remove all those identification aspects from a profile, whether it's names in certain companies, it's even pictures and schools, or like, I can see a world where at a top of the funnel, we can remove bias, or I'll say mitigate bias, right? Like, or reduce bias. And I'm not sure, I haven't got into a place to say that, okay, that's possible with AI, but I think it is. That said, that personal identification factors would play a big role.
Okay.
Yeah, and that plays into privacy a lot. In my mind,
right,
by combining all this data together, you want to be objective and that you don't know who the person is, but the reality is there's so much data out there that you can often identify who people are or make assumptions, and that's where the bias can come in my opinion. So it's very difficult to strip out all identity characteristics that would be potentially that would feed bias, because the data itself could be biased, or it could be analyzed in a way that kind of recreates the identity effectively in a biased fashion. It's very tricky, and that's why data scientists next time around, Manav.
Yeah, totally agree with Dave and Neetu, and indeed, I think the pendulum has swung where maybe 5-10 years ago, when this technology was becoming more popular, I was more hopeful that, oh yeah, if the tool itself just stripped the name and the education, the institution of education from the resume, that's going to remove a lot of the biases. But now I think the solution is really training and education for hiring managers and recruiters, because they're the ones that's going to be looking up on LinkedIn, right? They're the ones that's going to be using other AI tools to identify this person that you've sanitized. So, right, so they're going to take that sanitized resume, plug it back into another tool, and they're gonna find their social security number, right? So because right, we're humans, right? We want to feel like we're in control, especially hiring managers. As a hiring manager myself, like I have to hold myself back from, for example, when I interview people, I have to try to just look at the resume that's presented to me. I try not to look too deep, right, in terms of searching into their details on I don't know, Facebook or other channels. So I think the solution it goes back to what Neetu mentioned. It's about training and helping our TA team and hiring managers follow processes that's going to be more helpful to the outcomes.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is very interesting, even because like if you think of it, even in the content of a profile or a resume, you would see themes, how different cultures speak about the same thing in different manner, right? And even that could create biases in the two. So yeah, it's a very interesting subject, and we can keep going on, but yeah, back to you, Manav.
So another question, and this is also coming back to a point that Ivan made earlier on candidate side. And very interesting. I think it's a very basic question, but I'll just like to know what the thoughts are, especially from recruiting teams. Right, Neetu, you can chip in as well. That, in your opinion, is it okay for a candidate to take help of, let's say, ChatGPT during interview? And the rationale is because they would be using it in their job. Like, this is inevitable now, right? So they would be doing this during their job. So as a skill, it just represents another skill. Is it okay?
So I will share with you that this has been a hot topic within my network.
Mm-hmm.
And it's definitely there have been different opinions. Some have a yes and some have a no. Like, so it's as you said, it's just a skill, and people even using it, they need to know how to provide that input to get the output. And if they cannot do that basic input, then are they problem solvers, right? Like, so that's because ultimately what you want in a company is not just be good coding and good system design. You need genuinely problem solvers. A great problem solver can be fit anywhere in the company and they'll still do great. Of course, there are some underlying skills, but problem solving is one of the important ones as well. And so I don't know if there is a right or a wrong answer. It's just conflicting views people have about it. Some feel ultimately coding is a fundamental skill, or system design is a fundamental skill, and that they should know that. And like, why if OpenAI was not here, or say if tomorrow all the AI tools go away, then what, right? And that's again a fair point of view, a fair argument there. So I don't have a right or a wrong answer. Personally, I feel that as humans, we adapt and we evolve.
And on the flip side, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just
We
saying
evolve and we adapt, I was saying. So this could just be an evolution,
right.
But it doesn't really takes away from whether this person can do a basic stuff or not. It's an add-on.
Yeah, I was saying on the flip side, many of us are looking for resourcefulness in candidate, right? So this is resourcefulness as you get along. A very, very, very interesting question. And again, any one of you can chip in, or all of you can chip in. So someone seems to be a little irritated by AI recruiting vendors. They are getting a lot of requests a week to, meet them. It's a very noisy, or become very noisy right now. Do you guys have any recommendation on how to determine good versus the bad AI products, or good versus the not so good AI products? Before
I have a request.
Yes.
I have a request for all those technology entrepreneurs out there to create a tool to filter AI tools.
Point taken. I think we're already a minute over. There are some questions, and some of the relevant ones I might just send out to the panelists later and see what they have to say. I do have time for, I guess, just one more question. And yeah, maybe this one I'll direct it to you, Ivan, especially, that training data is said to be biased, because you mentioned something about, AI coaching. So while the training data set is biased, AI, as you rightly said, right, can also help to change or alter behaviors of individuals. You've shared your experience with, Microsoft trying to add that, or Grammarly doing this, but does that change in behavior necessarily okay, especially in the context of hiring? Do you see something, or do you foresee something there?
From the perspective of, let's just take the way that we communicate with candidates, or the way that any organization wants to communicate with candidates. We want to present a compelling employer brand, and we want to present a compelling employer value proposition. Especially in the context of hiring globally, the person who's communicating needs to have a level of cultural competency in order to achieve the outcomes of, we're not even talking about, we're talking further, really high up at on the funnel, right? We're talking about communication. right? We're not talking further down. If our defined objective is to have inclusive communication, then it benefits everyone to be trained using such tools in their daily writing and I would just call it good writing or good communication to begin with. In the same way where some people ask me, hey, Ivan, should we have DEI training? And I say, there are certain contexts where we may need to have a particular module, but overall, good leadership training is good DEI training. Good leadership and good DEI are synonymous. So if you already have that as foundation, good communication as a foundation, and you use tools to train yourself to communicate inclusively, then you're going to meet all of your underlying objectives.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I'd like to thank all three of you and all the people who decided to attend. I still see 30 people hanging on, and I thank everyone. David, for next time, definitely a data scientist. And thank you, Neetu, for coming in. Thank you, Ivan. I will be sharing the recording and this with all the participants who registered. Feel free to share it among your organizations as well. Thank you so much. It was a very, very interesting conversation, at least for me.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Manav.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.